The Dare. The house stood alone, on a hill, dark, forbidding. Locals told stories, whispers of tragedy. They never went near. Except me. I was dared. Friends laughing, thought I was scared. Maybe I was, but something drew me in. The darkness, the silence, the secrets it held. I would spend the night, prove them wrong. Took a deep breath, stepped inside. Air turned cold, heavy, like a weight on my chest. Smell of decay. Dust motes danced in the faint moonlight. Silence was absolute, except for a shadow of doubt, a sound, faint scratching. From upstairs, my heart pounded. Told myself it was rats. The house was old, but doubt crept in, like the cold seeping into my bones. I climbed the stairs. Each step creaked a protest. Shadows stretched and danced on the walls. Cast by the moon, or something else? Fear tightened its grip, but I pushed on, couldn't turn back now. Reached the top, a long hallway, doors on either side, all closed, except one, slightly ajar. A pale light flickered inside. My blood ran cold. Who could be here? Creaking steps and cold whispers. I approached the room, each step a creak, each creak an echo in the silence. My hand trembled as I pushed the door open. The room was bare, except for a rocking chair, rocking slowly, back and forth, back and forth. No one was there, but the rocking continued. A cold breeze swept through the room, whispering my name. I shivered. This house was alive. I could feel it, watching me. I had to get out. Turned to leave, but the door slammed shut, locked. I rattled the handle, pounded on the wood. Nothing. Panic surged. I was trapped. The bloody diary. I spun around, searching for another way out. The night was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to make sense of my surroundings. The air was heavy, almost suffocating, as if the very atmosphere was conspiring against me. I could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching my every move, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. The darkness seemed to close in around me, pressing in from all sides, leaving me with a growing sense of dread. The rocking chair stopped. Silence descended again, heavy and oppressive. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. The stillness was almost tangible, wrapping around me like a shroud. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and rapid, echoing in the oppressive quiet. The fog that had settled over the countryside added to the sense of isolation, making it feel as though I was the only person left in the world. Every creak of the old house, every whisper of the wind seemed to carry a sinister undertone, hinting at the horrors that lay hidden within. Then I saw it, a diary, lying on the floor, covered in dust and blood. The sight of it sent a chill down my spine. It was as if the book itself was a living entity, pulsating with a malevolent energy. The bloodstains on the cover were dark and dried, a stark contrast to the faded, dusty leather. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the diary, as if touching it would somehow unleash the horrors contained within. But curiosity got the better of me, and I reached down, my fingers trembling as they made contact with the cold, damp leather. I picked it up. The leather was cold and damp, the pages brittle with age. As I opened the diary, a musty smell filled the air, a mix of decay and something else, something darker. The pages crinkled under my touch, each one a fragile testament to the passage of time. The ink had faded, but the words were still legible, their meaning clear and horrifying. It was as if the diary was a window into the past, a glimpse into the mind of someone who had been consumed by madness. The handwriting was spidery and faded. Each word filled me with dread. The entries were disjointed, a chaotic jumble of thoughts and emotions. It was clear that the writer had been descending into madness, their grip on reality slipping away with each passing day. The words seemed to crawl across the page, as if they were alive, writhing and twisting in the dim light. I could feel the writer's fear, their desperation, seeping through the pages, infecting my own mind with a sense of impending doom. It was a diary of madness, of horror, of blood. The entries spoke of unspeakable acts, of a mind unraveling under the weight of its own darkness. The writer had been tormented by visions, haunted by voices that whispered terrible things in the dead of night. Each page was a descent into a nightmare, a journey into the depths of human depravity. The bloodstains on the pages were a grim reminder of the violence that had been unleashed, a testament to the horrors that had been committed within these walls. The writer spoke of a family, murdered in this house. The entries detailed the slow unraveling of a once loving father, driven to madness by the voices that plagued him. He had become a monster, a shadow of his former self, consumed by a darkness that he could not escape. The family photographs scattered on the floor were a haunting reminder of the lives that had been destroyed, the innocent faces now forever etched in my mind. The writer's guilt and remorse were palpable, their words a desperate plea for forgiveness that would never come. By their own father. He had gone mad, driven by voices. The voices had whispered terrible things to him, filling his mind with dark thoughts and violent urges. He had tried to resist, but the voices had been relentless, wearing down his sanity until he could no longer distinguish between reality and the twisted fantasies they fed him. The house itself seemed to be a living entity, feeding off the madness and despair that had taken root within its walls. The moonlight cast eerie shadows on the exterior, adding to the sense of foreboding that hung heavy in the air. Evil voices, the same voices I now heard, whispering in the shadows. They were faint at first, barely audible over the pounding of my heart. But as I stood there, clutching the diary, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to come from all around me, echoing off the walls and filling the room with a sinister presence. I could feel their malevolent intent, their desire to drive me to the same madness that had consumed the writer. The shadows seemed to move and shift, taking on shapes that were both familiar and terrifying. I knew I had to get out, but the voices were relentless, their whispers wrapping around my mind like a vice, threatening to pull me into the darkness. A cold hand touched my shoulder. I screamed, whirled around. A figure stood behind me. The night was thick with an unsettling silence, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears like a drum. The figure was shrouded in darkness, its form barely discernible against the backdrop of the eerie forest. I could feel the chill of its presence, a cold that seeped into my bones and made my skin crawl. A woman, dressed in white. Her face was pale and gaunt, her eyes empty sockets. She seemed to float rather than walk, her movements slow and deliberate. The air around her seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly glow, casting an eerie light on her ghostly form. Her dress, once white, was now stained with the passage of time, tattered and torn. Her hair, long and matted, framed her hollow face, giving her an even more haunting appearance. I could feel her gaze, or what should have been her gaze, piercing through me, as if she could see into the very depths of my soul. Blood dripped from her lips. She reached for me, her voice a mournful whisper. "Join us," she hissed. Her words sent a shiver down my spine, the sound like nails on a chalkboard. It was a voice filled with sorrow and despair, a voice that spoke of endless suffering. I could see the pain etched on her face, the torment that had become her existence. Her hand, cold and clammy, reached out to me, and I could feel the icy touch even before she made contact. It was as if her very presence was draining the life from me, pulling me into her world of eternal torment. Join us in our eternal torment. I recoiled in terror. The diary tumbled from my grasp, its pages scattering across the floor. The words on the pages seemed to come alive, the ink bleeding and shifting to form new, horrifying messages. I could hear whispers all around me, voices of the damned calling out, begging for release. The room seemed to close in on me, the walls pressing in, the air growing thick and suffocating. I could feel the weight of their despair, the hopelessness that had consumed them. It was a feeling that threatened to overwhelm me, to pull me down into the darkness with them. I scrambled back, putting distance between us. Her touch, her voice. It was like ice, draining the warmth from my body. I could feel my strength waning, my limbs growing heavy and numb. Every breath was a struggle, the air thick with the scent of decay and death. I could see the other spirits now, their forms flickering in and out of existence, their faces twisted in agony. They reached out to me, their hands grasping, their voices pleading. I knew I had to get away, to escape this nightmare before it consumed me completely. I had to escape, but the door remained locked. There was nowhere to run. Panic set in, my mind racing as I searched for a way out. The shadows seemed to close in, the darkness growing thicker, more oppressive. I could hear the spirits closing in, their whispers growing louder, more insistent. I could feel their cold breath on my neck, their hands brushing against my skin. I knew I had to find a way out, to break free from this nightmare. But the door remained locked, the walls closing in, the darkness consuming me. I was trapped with no way out, no escape from the ghostly encounter that had become my reality. Panic and pursuit. The woman in white glided towards me, her eyes burning into mine. Her presence was ethereal, almost otherworldly, and yet the terror she invoked was all too real. The fog around her seemed to thicken, swirling like a living entity, as if it were an extension of her malevolent will. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, each beat a desperate plea for escape. I stumbled back, tripping over the scattered pages of the diary. The diary, an old leather-bound book, had been my only clue to the mysteries of this forsaken place. Its pages were filled with cryptic symbols and haunting illustrations, each one more disturbing than the last. As I fell, the pages fluttered around me like the wings of dark, ominous birds, each one whispering secrets of the past. Fear lent me strength. I scrambled to my feet, throwing myself against the door again and again. The door was old and weathered, its wood splintering under my relentless assault. Each impact sent a jolt of pain through my shoulder, but I couldn't stop. I had to get out. The woman's presence was growing stronger, her laughter more insistent, as if she were feeding off my fear. But it wouldn't budge. The woman's laughter echoed behind me, cold and cruel. It was a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, filling the air with a chilling resonance. Her laughter was not just a sound, it was a manifestation of her power, a reminder of my helplessness. I could feel her icy breath on the back of my neck, a prelude to the touch I dreaded. I was trapped with a vengeful spirit in a house of horrors. The house itself seemed to be alive, its walls pulsing with a dark energy. Shadows danced in the corners, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind, seemed to carry a warning. This was her domain, and I was an intruder. Her icy fingers brushed my neck. I cried out. The touch was like a jolt of electricity, sending a wave of terror through my body. It was as if her very essence was seeping into my skin, freezing my blood and paralyzing my limbs. I could feel her coldness spreading, a creeping frost that threatened to consume me. The touch sent shivers down my spine. I had to get away, had to find another way out. My mind raced, searching for any possible escape. The windows were barred, the doors locked, and the walls seemed to close in around me. I could hear her footsteps, slow and deliberate, as she approached. Each step was a countdown to my doom. But the room offered no escape, only darkness and despair. The darkness was suffocating, a tangible force that pressed in on me from all sides. It was as if the very air was thick with malevolence, each breath a struggle. Despair settled over me like a heavy shroud, and I realized that there was no way out. I was trapped, a prisoner of the past, and the woman in white was my jailer. Her eyes, burning with an unholy fire, were the last thing I saw before the darkness claimed me. Trapped. I spun around to face my tormentor, but she was gone, vanished into thin air. The room was silent again, except for the pounding of my heart. I was alone, but for how long? I scanned the room, desperately searching for a way out. A loose floorboard, a hidden passage, anything. But there was nothing. Just bare walls and the oppressive silence. I was trapped in this house of horrors, with a vengeful spirit and the ghosts of the past. The diary's words echoed in my mind. No escape, it whispered. No escape. A gruesome discovery. Then I noticed it. A faint scratching sound coming from beneath the floorboards. It was the same sound I had heard earlier, but now it was closer, more insistent. And it was accompanied by a low growl. Fear lent me strength. I grabbed a loose floorboard and pried it up. The stench that hit me was overwhelming, the smell of decay and death. And then I saw it, a hand reaching up from the darkness. No escape. I stumbled back in horror. The hand retreated back into the darkness, but the growling continued. Louder now, angrier. Something was down there, something evil, and it was hungry. I had stumbled into a nightmare, a place of unimaginable horror, and there was no escape. The house held me captive, its secrets buried deep within its walls, secrets that were better left undisturbed. The scratching grew louder, closer. I closed my eyes, waiting for the inevitable. The diary's final words echoed in my mind. Death comes for us all.